Happy Mother's Day. You know, I never imagined that would be a controversial thing to say, that saying Happy Mother's Day would be met with some resistance. I thought for my entire life that wishing mothers a Happy Mother's Day would be universally praised. But I get it. I understand. Many of us didn't have perfect moms, and there are those who carry the wounds of moms who were working out their own story, who were struggling to find their own way, and some of those wounds have been left in her children. And I understand that wishing a Happy Mother's Day has sort of some caution, some negative emotions. I understand that for some people, the whole idea of Mother's Day is really a thing that reminds them of their inadequacy. I know there are some who long to be mothers, who wish to be mothers, who are unable. I also know there are those who have lost their mothers. And on a day like today, when we celebrate motherhood, it becomes a painful reminder of what we have lost. I also know that there are single moms who are in the trenches every day just trying to survive and fight off the temptation of wishing that they had never become a mother because of the complexity and the difficulty of that journey that they find themselves on. I realize that there are grandmothers who found themselves, through no fault of their own, re-engaged in a second term of motherhood because of the problems and the struggles of their own children. I understand that just saying Happy Mother's Day, I wish it were as simple as acknowledging the perfection of that idea, but I realize it's not. I realize that for some of us, it's a day of great mixed emotions. But I will unapologetically celebrate Mother's Day today. I will not apologize for celebrating the mothers in my life and the mothers in the world that we live in. And I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about the difficulties or the frailties of celebrating motherhood. In fact, I take the advice of one of the great maternal advisors in my lifetime. Her name is Irma Bombeck. It was Irma Bombeck who famously said, "Worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it really never gets you anywhere." Irma Bombeck also shared her maternal wisdom when she said, "When a mother asks, 'Do you want a piece of advice?' it is a mere formality. It doesn't matter if you answer yes or no, you're going to get it anyway." She said that my idea of housework is to sweep a room with a glance. She said, "My theory on housework is that if the item doesn't multiply, smell, catch fire, or block the refrigerator door, then let it be. No one else cares. Why should you?" When my kids become wild and unruly, I use a nice, safe playpen. When they're finished, I climb out. And then she said, "One thing they never tell you about child raising is that for the rest of your life, at the drop of a hat, you are expected to know your child's name and how old he or she is." True maternal wisdom. But today I want to share with you some wisdom from someone like Irma Bombeck who has been there and understands that. Wisdom not just for mothers, but wisdom from an eternal mother, from the eternal maternal. The words of the 46th Psalm, the words sung by the sons of Korah to the tune of Alamoth, the tune of the higher register, the tune of the feminine voices. We hear the voice of the maternal eternal. We began this study a month ago of Psalm 46 so that on Mother's Day we could be here to hear the motherhood of God whisper to us, "Be still and know that I am God. It's my prayer today that if you are a mom and you're struggling with the burdens of raising your children and being faithful to that highest of callings, if you're a mom who is separated from her children, or if you're a child who has lost a mom, or whatever your relationship is with your mother, it's my prayer today that we would hear the voice of the maternal eternal, that we would hear the voice of the motherhood of God embracing us and whispering to us, shh, be still. I got this. It's going to be okay. The word there in Psalm 46 for still is the word rafach. Rafach is a word that etymologically came from the Phoenician language. The Phoenicians were a nation of sailors. They navigated much of the Mediterranean world. And the word rafach was a word in the Phoenician language that described the unfurling of a sail. You can almost hear the sound of it in rafach. The sail being let down, the sail being relaxed. It came in the Phoenician language to mean to let your guard down, to let your hands down. In the Hebrew language, it meant to relax, to be still, to be calm, rafach. But I really think to understand what rafach means, what it truly means, you have to understand it in its context. Because as it's used throughout the Hebrew Bible, it has different nuances. Because we understand how the nuances of relax or to be still can change depending on the context, depending on who's saying it. For example, if you're in California, someone might say it, bruh, chill out, bruh. You are like hella tight right now, so you need to just relax. You need to chill, bro. Or if you're in New York, somebody might say, yo, you talking to me? You telling me to relax? I'll show you how to relax. I'll chill all over you. What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? Or like when I grew up in Pennsylvania, Dutch country of eastern Pennsylvania. And the Amish, my Amish grandfather would say, yes, Dave, yeah, sure, Dave. Yeah, you need to stop your fussing there, Dave. You need to simmer down now, Dave. That's what you need to do. Or, of course, Texans would have a dozen different ways to say, now listen to me there, sonny boy. You just need to loosen up your chaps a little bit. You need to put your feet up a little bit and just take a load off. You just need to relax. Just sit a spell. It depends on who's saying it. When my dad said, be still, kind of came across like a command. It usually involved a hand gesture. When my father said, you sit still, you sit right there. You be still. Don't you move, mister. I mean, there was this idea of you had to sit and be silent. That was what my dad meant when he said, be still. I think fathers have an entire thesaurus of meanings for telling their children to sit down and be quiet. It's like, shut your pie hole or shut your yapper, or you just stay there and don't you move. And fathers have an entire thesaurus. And I realize moms can put the wood to it too. Moms can give you that. You better behave. You better sit still. I always got it from my mom when she used my middle name. David Aaron. No, you David Aaron, you behave. You sit still. But you see, my mom was fluent in another language. She was fluent in the language of heaven. She was fluent in the eternal maternal language. I remember, and it's over 50 years ago now, the last time, and as I look back with some regret that I didn't take more advantage of her fluency in this language. But when you get to be a teenage boy, it's awkward to let your mom mother you. But I remember the last time was probably 11 or 12 years old, and I was going through that, that adolescent drama, the life drama. I don't know what it was. Some friends didn't like me, or I didn't make the baseball team, or some drama was happening. And I remember my mom bringing me onto her lap and wrapping her arms around me and pulling me close. And in the language of the motherhood of God, she spoke the fluent tongue of heaven when she just said, shh, 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 shh. It's going to be okay. It'll be all right. I've got this. See, I think this is the tone of the 46th Psalm. It is a reminder to us of the motherhood of God. Now, I'm ashamed to say that in my theological tradition, I cannot literally remember a class. I cannot remember a single lecture where we talked about the maternal nature of God. Now, it's possible that we had lectures or we had classes if you understood my approach to my graduate education. In fact, I've thought about this, if they were ever going to build a statue to me at Dallas Theological Seminary, which, by the way, will never happen. If they were going to build a statue, it would be a bronze statue of me asleep in a carrel at the library, which is where I think I spent most of my graduate education. So it's possible that I slept through the class or the lecture about the maternal nature of God, but I missed it. How is that even possible? How is it possible for us to imagine that God is not equally male and female? Where did we come up with this? And I understand the logic of it, because we refer to God as our Father. It seems almost heretical to refer to God as our mother. And all of the pronouns that are used throughout the writings of the Bible are uniquely masculine, he and him and his. And so the masculinity of God is affirmed over and over and over again. That doesn't mean that God is not equal parts female or feminine and equal parts masculine and male. I kind of have a theory, and you can feel free to disagree with me because it's just a theory. And I think the reason that God consistently represents his masculinity, the masculinity of God is represented in the fatherhood of God and the identity of God, is strictly because men are idiots. It's just because we need the constant reminder that it is a manly thing to be a godly person. I believe that women understand this biologically, genetically, in spite of the cultural inclination to pull them to one side or the other. I think women understand in their physical form the value of being a life giver. Men need to be constantly reminded that it is a manly thing to be a life-giving person, to be a sacrificial individual. It's just a theory that I have, and you can feel free to disagree with me or call me a misogynist or some other pejorative name, but I believe we miss it. We miss the idea that God is in effect equal parts masculine and feminine. Go back to the very beginning. Go back to the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, at the creation of humanity, at the very beginning of humanity, it says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And then it says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. Sprinkled throughout the writings of the Hebrew Bible are the images like in Isaiah. Isaiah says, this is what the Lord says, I will extend peace. You will nurse and be carried on her arm and held on her lap. As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you. The words of Hosea portray the maternal, eternal. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, I who took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. To not understand the maternal character of God is to miss a full 50% of the fullness of who God is. I hope we are not ignorant enough to think that God is a pants-wearing man, that God is both fully maternal and fully fraternal. This is what I believe is going on in Psalm 46. The sons of Korah wrote a tune to be sung in the feminine voices. And when they come to the conclusion of the psalm, they sing out, "Be still and know that I am God. Know that I have got this." It sounds so much like the words of my own mother that it brings me comfort. It is that maternal embrace that says, I have this. The exaltation among the nations, the exaltation on the earth it's not a gender-specific thing. It is the kindness, it is the nurturing, it is the compassion and the care of God that is celebrated. That God is the one who is with them, and God is their refuge. These are things that mothers understand. In the ferocity of life, the love of a mother is equally ferocious. There's an urban legend that grew up around young Paula Sechan. She had just celebrated her 33rd birthday. She was married to an Arizona State University botany professor named Michael Sechan. And she had 2 children. She had a son, David, who was 6, and a daughter, Cecilia, who was 4. And they had traveled from Arizona to Philadelphia to visit with her family to celebrate her 33rd birthday. On August the 16th, 1987, they made their way back to Phoenix, Arizona. They flew out of Philadelphia that afternoon through Detroit on their way to Phoenix. At 8:46 p.m., the flight they were on leaving Detroit Metro Airport, Northwest Airlines 255, because of a catastrophic error of the flight crew, crashed on takeoff. 156 people were killed that day. 6 of the flight crew and 2 people on what was Middle Belt Road, and 148 of 149 of the passengers on Northwest 255. As the first responders almost instantly rolled up onto the debris field and saw the catastrophe, the ferocity of the crash, they shifted almost immediately from search and rescue to search and recovery. As the firefighters and paramedics were making their way through the debris field, a young firefighter from Detroit heard what he thought was the moaning of a young woman. John went over, and underneath the passenger seat, as he pulled it up, was 4-year-old Cecilia Sechan, still strapped in her seat, 8C. She had a fractured skull and a broken leg and a broken collarbone and 3rd-degree burns over 30% of her body. She would undergo 4 skin grafts and stay in the hospital for almost 2 months, but young Cecilia was the lone survivor of that crash. And the urban legend that grew up around her mother was because her body was found just a few feet away from her daughter with her seatbelt removed. And the urban legend that grew up around that story of the survival of the infant Cecilia Sechan was that in the moments, in the fractions of a second, before the aircraft tumbled onto Middle Belt Road, young Paula Sechan undid her seatbelt and threw her body over the body of her 4-year-old daughter in order to save her in the crash. The Detroit County Medical Examiner said that the injuries that all of the passengers sustained were severe blunt force trauma injuries, that most of them died on impact. The NTSB crash scene investigators and even the forensic engineers who examined the data of the crash agreed that it was one of the most ferocious that they had ever measured. And they concluded that even if Paula Sechan had shielded her young daughter with her body, it would not have prevented her death. And the medical examiner concluded that young Cecilia Sechan lived without any scientific explanation as to how. They couldn't say whether or not Paula had shielded her with her body or whether or not that had saved her life. But everyone who has known a mother worthy of their calling understands that impulse, understands the ferocity of that protective instinct that says, in this instant, I will exchange my life for yours. That is the behavior of the maternal eternal. That is the sentiment, that is the voice of the motherhood of God that cries out. In the book of Hosea, it says that God is like a bear robbed of her cubs. I will attack them and tear them asunder. Isaiah equates this ferocious passion. He says, can a woman forget her nursing child or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget. And God says, yet I will not forget you. Book of Deuteronomy compares the maternal in God to an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young. God spreads wings to catch you and carries you on its pinions like the mothering eagle. It is the image from the book of Genesis, the image of the beginning of humanity as fashioned in the image of God. Let us make man in our image. And God did it by making them male and female. That God is equal parts masculine and feminine. That God is equal parts male and female. It is in the voice of Jesus when he said in John chapter 14, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. Shh, 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 shh. It's going to be okay. I've got this. Because I am the eternal maternal. It is what is celebrated in the 46th Psalm. I believe that the sons of Korah wrote a song to be sung in the tune of Alamoth, the tune of feminine voices, so that when we came through the voicing of the celebration of the psalm to the end, and it said, be still and know that I am God, that the celebration of the nations, the celebration of the earth would be that maternal protection, that Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord Almighty, is embracing us. And Elohim Yaakov, the God of Jacob, is with us. And it is the voice of a mother saying, shh, shh, shh. It's going to be okay. I've got this. And on this Mother's Day, we celebrate the heavenly voice of that. For almost 3 decades, Irma Bombeck was a nationally syndicated columnist. She wrote dozens of books about motherhood because she understood it. She had been a mother. She knew the journey of motherhood, and she had a wicked sense of humor. But in 1975, in her home paper was the Chicago Sun-Times, she published an article on Mother's Day in 1975 titled, "Someday I Will Tell You." And you hear the voice of an experienced mom, but I would suggest you also hear the voice of a maternal God. Bombeck said this, "You don't love me." How many times have your kids laid that one on you? And how many times have you as a parent resisted the urge to tell them how much? Someday, when my children are old enough to understand the logic that motivates a mother, I'll tell them that I loved you enough to bug you about where you were going, with who, and what time you would get home. I loved you enough to be silent and let you discover that your hand-picked friend was a creep. I love you enough to make you return a Milky Way with a bite out of it to the drugstore and confess, I stole this. I love you enough to stand over you for 2 hours while you cleaned your bedroom, a job that would have taken me 15 minutes. I loved you enough to not make excuses for your lack of respect or bad manners. I loved you enough to ignore what every other mother did. I love you enough to figure you would lie about the party being chaperoned, but forgive you for it after discovering I was right. I loved you enough to let you stumble and fall so that you could learn to stand alone. I loved you enough to accept you for what you are, not what I wanted you to be. But most of all, I loved you enough to say no when you hated me for it. That was the hardest part of all. My mother died yesterday. Yesterday, May the 9th, 2019, 1 year ago yesterday. This was the completion of the first year that I have ever lived without my mother. At the end of her life, she was so frail and so uncomfortable and in so much pain, it was a release. But this has been the first year that I have lived without her, and there have been times when I have thought that she did that, she timed that, just so that I would remember. Because every 6 years or so, May 9th is Mother's Day next year, 2021. May 9th will be a Sunday, and it will be a Mother's Day. It's also her first grandchild's first birthday. So I'm sure my mother did not plan it that way, and she didn't need to. Because even though it has been 50 years since I climbed into her lap, and she wrapped her arms around me, and told me it would be okay. It is a promise that has sustained me my entire life. So on this day, when I know there are those who find themselves in a place where it's difficult to celebrate their mother because of the wounds or the pain or the unforgiveness, because of the scars, because of the failures and imperfections, because of the struggle of your own life as a mother, because you're a young single mom who just wishes for a day when you didn't have all of these burdens, or the exhausted working mom, or the young woman who wishes that she could have the honor and fulfill her longing to become a mother, I realize the complexities of this generationally and emotionally and psychologically, but I will unapologetically celebrate the women in my life because I had a fantastic mother. I had a great mother-in-law. The mother of my children is beyond compare. And I'm the father of 3 amazing women. And so it is easy for me to stand here today and celebrate this day, and only to think it shouldn't be just this day. It should be every day that we honor and that we revere and that we remember the maternal eternal. And we thank our mothers for giving us life. So it is unapologetically, without pause, that I say thank you, moms. And I wish you a very happy Mother's Day.